people of Flint, I say tonight, as I have before, I am sorry and I will fix it. No citizen of this great state should endure this kind of catastrophe. Government failed you.
The governor gives his most pivotal State of the State address, apologizes, and pledges to make it right for the water crisis in Flint. Hi, and welcome to My Week. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christy McDonald. We are on the road this week at the Detroit Historical Museum, and what a pivotal week it is. The governor's State of the State focusing on Flint. Almost all DPS schools shut down by protesting teachers, and President Obama in town to see it all. Nolan and Stephen are here tonight with their analysis, and we are going to start with revelations coming out of Governor Snyder's emails that he released about the Flint water crisis. His office is excluded from the Freedom of Information Act, but he announced this week that he would release them so the people of Flint and Michigan could see what he knew and when. The legislature is also moving on the governor's $28.5 million request for money for Flint, and Flint residents who can't drink their tap water are picking up bottled water that has been brought and donated, as well as water filters. And more National Guard are being called in to help with distribution.
This is like the second or third time that we've actually came and got water, but it's so needed because I have small kids. They can't drink the water. It has lead in it. It helps. God knows it helps because it gets expensive after a while.
It's ridiculous. It is very ridiculous. Snyder doesn't care, because if he did, it would have been fixed, you know, or we would have been doing this. You guys would have had plenty of places, and this is just now starting. I mean, it sucks to be here, but we got to make it do what we got to do.
That's what a lot of people are doing, making do with what they have to do. There's a lot to cover tonight, so we're going to start with our My Week contributors. Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Guys, it's great to see you, and what a week this has been. Nolan, I want to start with the emails that have just been recently released, that Snyder released from his office. What did you see in there?
Some interesting look at the communications process. I think one of the more interesting exchanges was on September 28th of last year, when the governor's daily briefing, when the health department and the MEDQ were all on the line with him, and finally admitting that the medical experts and the professor were right about the lead after they had been denying it. You could see that for weeks or months, and when they finally came clean, I think that's was the most revelatory moment.
What did you see in there, Stephen, that piqued your attention?
There wasn't a whole lot new, but it does help you sort of piece together the timeline here, right? When did they know? How quickly did they respond to things when they did know them? It doesn't paint an especially flattering picture. I mean, there's a lot of well, we're not sure what to do. We're not sure if this is our problem.
That's what struck me a lot. It was like, this is a city problem. This is a county problem. Why are we really involved here?
And again, once you take over a city, you know, the emergency manager law should work like you break it, you bought it, right? You're in charge. Once you come in and do that, I don't think you can say this is a local problem or this is a county problem. You're running things. You got to make sure they work, and when they don't, you have to respond in an appropriate way.
And these emails coming out is really on this week of the State of the State address that the governor gave, where he spent 25 minutes talking about Flint and really getting probably the most emotional that we have seen him, or the most emotional that he gets as a person, in taking full responsibility for this and saying that he is sorry. Do you think his address, his tone, and now backing up with what he says the state is going to do to help Flint, is this enough to start to gain the trust back of the people in Flint and really the people in the state of Michigan, Nolan?
I think that's going to take a long time. I think it was the right first step, but they're going to have to see results. This is going to probably take the rest of his tenure to get this right and to restore faith in government. These people have been mistreated, wrongly used up in Flint. If you look at these emails, the response coming out of that into September 1st to October was still slow. It still wasn't with the urgency you might expect. I think there are two places where things really went off the dock here, and that was, the first one was in the Flint Water Department, when they just defied all of the experts and failed to put phosphates in that water. And then when the state finally learned, when the governor finally learned about the problems that resulted, sort of the slow wind up to a response. I mean, they responded, but it was very incremental, and I think those are the two revelatory points.
Well, is it also, Stephen, starting this larger conversation that we should be able to be seeing these kinds of communications coming out of the governor's office?
There's no question. We said it in an editorial Sunday, and then again later this week, that this exemption that the governor and the legislature enjoy from FOIA doesn't make any sense. There's only one other state in the country that does that, and this is a great example of why. Even with this release of emails, we just got the governor's emails. We didn't get those of the chief of staff or his communication staff. Those would actually further explicate this timeline and the response. And even in letting go what he did, the governor sort of talked about, well, I decided to do this myself. I didn't want to speak for my chief of staff or these other people, as if there was some, he's waiving some sort of privilege that he has, as opposed to seeing it as a public obligation to let people see what goes on in government. The whole way we think about this is turned upside down in Michigan right now.
Let's talk a little bit about his plan that he gave at the State of the State address in terms of asking for his $28.5 million right now, and the legislature is starting to move on that, for things like water, for things like nurses in the schools so they can start with some testing, and for some infrastructure as well. Nolan, is this a good first step, or could they have done a little bit more, asked for a little bit more money?
Well, I think when you see his budget address in a couple of weeks, that's where you'll know how deep the commitment is. This is a start. This is a supplement to the current budget. The 2017 budget will be introduced in about 2 weeks, I think, 2-3 weeks, and that's where the meat of this will be. That's where the real money will be, and I suspect it's going to be in the hundreds of millions.
I know it's going to take a lot of time, Stephen, for people to work through this, or to even start to trust not just the governor himself, but state government as a whole. But there have been calls for Governor Snyder to resign. Do you think that he should consider that?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you elect somebody to an office like that to do their job, right? They're elected for a term of office of 4 years, and in that 4 years, they're supposed to be able to respond to things, even absolutely tragic errors like this, with the right actions. I mean, the key here is to hold him accountable for having been elected by the people to do his job. I think a recall is a different question, right? That's also part of the democratic process. I mean, we have the right in this state to say, well, we think maybe we made a mistake. There's petitions going on now to see that. If they get the signatures, then he's going to have to face that. But I don't think you ask somebody to walk away lightly. I'm reminded of when Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick was in trouble, how long we waited to say, this is it. And it was not until he caught second charges, pushing those sheriffs on the porch, that we decided that he couldn't serve anymore. He couldn't do his job for all the trouble. I don't think the governor's in that kind of position.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that the governor has the most incentive of anyone now to solve this problem. It's his reputation. It's his legacy at stake. He owns this, and he should be the one to fix it.
That's his job. One thing that was brought up and interesting in some of these emails is one of his staffers called Congressman Dan Kildee, who's been very critical of the governor and his response, and has called him a press hound. We actually sat down with Congressman Kildee last Friday, and talked to him about some of the problems that's happening in Flint right now, what he'd like to see done, and we asked him if the governor should step down. Go ahead, take a look. It comes back to leadership. So I'm gonna ask you this. There are many recall efforts out to recall Governor Snyder. Do you support those efforts?
A lot of people have asked if I think he should step down.
Do you think he should?
I think he should step up. I think he should do his job. I think he should make it right for the people of Flint. Anyone right now who's sort of focused on the politics, I understand that. But when I see kids that can't get drinkable water, I don't want to talk about Governor Snyder's career. I want to talk about the career choices that these kids are going to have. The politics will take care of itself. He needs to step up. I understand, people think he failed, and he has. He's failed miserably. But the way you deal with that is not to walk away from the problem. He needs to step up and make it right.
So tell me specifically what he needs to do in the next 2 weeks that would say to you he's stepped up.
Well, one thing he could do is dedicate a portion of this state budget surplus. We see there's over $500 million in a surplus. Of course, not all of it's going to go to Flint, but he should dedicate a portion of that as a down payment on the process of making it right for the people of Flint. Be willing to consider a long-term sustained plan. But he could do one thing that's really kind of simple and small. He required the city of Flint to pay $2 million to reconnect to the Detroit water source. A city that had no authority to make the decisions for themselves, had the decision foisted upon them. And while it seems like a small thing, I think it's sort of a morally bankrupt approach to say that this poor city that doesn't even have enough money to keep their fire stations operational or keep their parks mowed has to reach in and get $2 million to correct a problem that the state inflicted upon them. To me, that would be a small gesture that is more than just an apology, but an acknowledgement of responsibility. That's what we need.
And you can see my whole interview with Congressman Kildee at myweek.org. We talked about a variety of things, the DEQ's role and also the EPA's role in all of this. But I think I want to bring it to a larger federal look because, of course, President Obama was in town yesterday as everything has been happening here in the state of Michigan. And he said he would be sick with worry if he were a parent in Flint. Do you think that's going to translate into any kind of extra help coming out of Washington, Stephen?
Not in the short term. I think the hope in Washington has to be that this sort of turns people's attention to the massive infrastructure problem and deficits we have, not just in places like Flint, but in Detroit, in Grand Rapids, in Muskegon, and all over the country. This was a president who got elected talking about the need to invest in infrastructure, not just for its own sake, but to get the economy started. We spent a lot of money doing these things. We haven't begun to really tackle that problem. I think the best thing he could do in this instance would be to use it as a way to focus people's attention on this is the kind of thing that happens when you don't invest.
Yeah, it's interesting. He also did say, we downplay the role that effective government has to play in protecting the public health and the safety of people. Nolan?
Well, yeah, and that's the federal level too. And we can't forget that there's a federal failure here as well. The EPA didn't do enough to protect the people of Flint. They knew about the problem and didn't raise a loud enough alarm, if any alarm. And so I think Obama has to step up, the federal government has to step up and approve this disaster declaration, get that $96 million flowing into Flint, and get this thing fixed. The state of Michigan, Governor Snyder that's not the only failure. The Flint local officials, that's not the only failure. The federal government failed as well. A lot of people failed Flint, and a lot of people should step up.
I think it's interesting the role that Flint's mayor is now taking. She was in Washington and she met with the president, and there was someone from the president's staff who then came to Flint and visited as well. What do you make of this new role that she's playing?
Well, I mean, her role is just going to be more outsized. She's become a symbol, a national symbol of what happened there, and then going forward, she's going to have to be a symbol of how you work with government better to make sure these things don't happen. I mean, and Nolan's right. It's not just local. It's not just state. It is the federal government, not just through the EPA, but again, how we prioritize infrastructure investment in this country. I mean, you're talking about $1 trillion that we need in the next 25 years just to repair and upgrade water systems in this country. That doesn't talk about the roads and the other things that we need. This is a huge problem, and if she can become again a catalyst for that focus going forward, then that'd be a good thing.
And I think she's really done a good job, a masterful job politically. I mean, she hasn't stood up and screamed and pointed fingers, and she's tried to maintain a good relationship with the governor. She's tried to bring down the anxiety level in her community. She's tried to stay on good relations with the federal government. She's really acting politically for the good of her people, trying to make sure she maintains good ties to the people who can help Flint.
What do you want to see the governor do now in the next 2 weeks, Nolan, as we come off his State of the State address and him saying, putting all of my energies and taking the next 3 years to make sure that we get this right?
I talked to him yesterday and I asked if he were going to spend the kind of time and energy in Flint that he did in Detroit during the bankruptcy, where he always claimed he spent 20 to 25% of his time on Detroit. And he said you could expect a similar amount of time, a similar commitment. I think what we need to see next is the budget, and the budget has to begin spelling out that long-term plan and how we're going to fund it and how it's going to look, what it's going to look like.
Not that you want anyone to lose their jobs, but do you think that we are going to see more heads roll at the DEQ? I mean, we only really just saw the head resign, and we saw the spokesperson resign, and then someone was reassigned. Do you think we might see more shift?
Maybe, but more importantly, the question is, how does the DEQ function, right? How did the DEQ get itself into this kind of position where it was not only not doing its job, but was also not responsive to the governor's office in the way that it was being questioned. In addition, you know, Rick Snyder, when he came into office, sort of touted this idea of loosening regulations and backing off of government strictures. I think we got to look back at some of those decisions. Is there enough money going to the DEQ to try to deal with these things? Are there the right protocols in place? There is a lot of unpacking to do there, and I'm not sure it's so much about individuals who should lose their jobs or not, as it is the culture there and the way we regulate.
Individual heads should roll this. And the only reason they haven't is because of civil service protections. The process has started to sweep a bunch of the people who screwed up out the door.
Yeah, we can talk about people who screwed up, we can talk about the politics of it all, but the reality is you have people that are collecting and getting bottled water to function every single day. When it takes 6 bottles of water to boil a pot of spaghetti, and these are how people are living every day, I think we still have to remember that fact and really also thank the people who have stepped up with donations and whatnot. It's been an amazing thing to see, and this has led almost every national newscast this week at some point or another, and of course this is a story we're going to continue to follow.